This special presentation was produced in high definition by WEDU, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota.
Coming up next, the president's proposed budget and Trump care both could have a big impact on Floridians. Murder at a suspected neo-Nazi cell in Tampa. The future of that massive education bill is still up in the air, and a new study finds that school choice in Florida is a factor leading to more segregation. Political Insights next on Florida This Week.
From the WEDU studios, this is Florida This Week. And now, moderator Rob Lorai.
Welcome back. This week our panelists are John Romano is a columnist for the Tampa Bay Times. Barry Edwards is a political commentator and a Democrat. William March is a freelance political reporter. And Bill Bunting is a Pasco County Republican State Committeeman. Well, it's so good to have you here. Thank you for coming. Well, the Congressional Budget Office issued its report this week on the effects of the Republican health care legislation that was passed by the House. The CBO says the bill will increase the number of uninsured in the U.S. by 14 million next year because the Affordable Health Care Act, or Trump Care, reduces Medicaid funding to states. More than 3 million Floridians who currently have Medicaid will be in jeopardy. A political group backed by House Speaker Paul Ryan is running this ad in support of the House Republican bill.
As a mom, rising healthcare costs are a big concern. My family lost our insurance and doctor because of the Affordable Care Act. But now we have hope. House Republicans are keeping their word and fixing our broken healthcare system. More competition and choices resulting in lower costs and better coverage. Families get tax credits to make insurance cheaper, and people with pre-existing conditions are protected. Thank Congressman Don Bacon for fighting for the better health care we deserve.
The claim in that ad that people with pre-existing conditions are protected was rated mostly false by PolitiFact. Meantime, President Trump issued a budget proposal this week that would have a big impact on Florida, cutting domestic programs, cutting taxes, and increasing military spending. Among the programs on the chopping block, food stamps, the EPA, Medicaid, the National Institute of Health, and Amtrak. St. Petersburg Democratic Congressman Charlie Crist issued a statement saying the proposed budget cuts taxes for the very wealthy while leaving the poor, sick, and disabled out in the cold. It doubles down on cruel cuts to Medicaid, despite Mr. Trump's promise not to touch it. In Pinellas County, where 40% of our children depend on Medicaid and CHIP for their health care, what could be more heartless? Meantime, Republican Senator Marco Rubio issued a statement about the plan this week, saying he supports the part that increases funding for school choice, but he opposes the part that cuts the State Department. So, Barry, a lot there. What do you think about that ad, first of all? Do you like that ad?
Well, it's false. And I think we ought to start off. This is not my words, but the Republicans in Congress said this is a $600 billion tax cut. And what they're doing is they're getting rid of the Affordable Health Care Act to pay for and shift for the $600 billion tax cut. So that's number one. But in the campaign, Donald Trump said no one will lose coverage. That's a lie. Donald Trump said the deductible would not go up, it would go down. That's a lie. Donald Trump said there'd be better care under this program. That's a lie. And Donald Trump said there'd be more choices. That's a lie. And they attacked the CBO. Well, let's look at the CBO scoring system. The CBO was 1% off on what they estimated in 2008 what Medicare and Medicaid would cost. 1%. Their error was that they thought there'd be 30 million people covered in the exchanges, and there were only 27 million because more people didn't leave their employ. So the CBO was legitimate, and they voted in the House before they got a CBO score. And the Senate has a CBO score, which means they're never going to pass it. So this is not going to see the light of day. But this is just another disingenuous attempt by the president, who is well-intentioned but never looks at the details. He said, who knew health care was so difficult and complex? Anybody with a thought in America.
All right, so
how do you feel about it, Barry?
yeah, let us know how you really feel about it, Barry. So, Bill, two big domestic issues here: the American Health Care Act and the president's proposed budget for the coming fiscal year. Is it a net positive for Florida? Net negative?
I don't know if it's a net positive or a net negative, but I do know that if they turn and they look at what the states did, what Maine did and Wisconsin did if they turn the money back over, states that have a productive system and getting it right, and I think the states can act in a more responsible way than big government can.
So you're talking about health care?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there are states that it's working.
Now, I've seen some polls. The last health care bill had like a 17% approval rating. There was a poll this week that said that this one had a 32% approval rating, which is a lot better than the old one. But Bill, even 32% is quite low, though.
It's quite low, but Barry's right on one thing. They want to cut the budget, they want to cut the taxes, and that's going to be part of it. And then when you look at some of the families that come in on Medicaid, you take a family of four at $7,000 a person. That's $28,000 a year. Where's the accountability?
I think the problem here is that Americans are okay with Congress fixing Obamacare because it does have some problems. The problem is that Congress doesn't want to have anything to do with it. They don't want to fix it. They want to obliterate it. They want to wipe out a legacy there instead of doing what Americans really want, which is taking a flawed health care bill and fixing it, making it better for everybody.
Now, in this new bill, there's no guarantee that pre-existing conditions will be covered. There were some things I think it's fair to say in the Obamacare legislation that were popular, like pre-existing conditions and no discrimination.
Children on the system until you're 26.
Mm-hmm. All right. So if the intention is to obliterate Obamacare and not fix it, then what position does that put the Republicans in?
It puts the Republicans in a position where the House is passing a bill that even they don't believe in. Bill Orakis said it himself that, okay, I'm going to vote for this bill, but the Senate's going to fix it. Because he knows it's a terrible bill that most Americans are not going to be happy with. So what we're seeing now is whether the Senate is going to completely rewrite this. Take the low score from the CBO and say, okay, the House's bill doesn't work at all. Let's see if we can look at health care anew and come up with something better. It'd be better if they looked at it and said, let's just build on what we already have instead of starting from scratch.
Wendy, the other thing is that the president's out with this budget idea, and he wants to cut the food stamp program. He wants to cut Medicaid. He wants to cut the EPA, and Amtrak service in Florida would essentially be eliminated. And I'm wondering, what do you think how do you think the voters in Florida feel about those kind of programs?
Well, it's going to depend in part on how much they hear about them. In addition to what you mentioned, he's proposing a 30% cut in Superfund cleanup. Florida has, I think, about 60 Superfund sites. As you noted, it would eliminate Amtrak service. That's 1 million riders a year. $132 million in community development block grants. I mean, you can go down the list. One thing that hasn't received much attention is that in conjunction with the budget proposal, the American Health Care Act would hasten the insolvency date for Medicare. Mm-hmm. What's the biggest Medicare state in the nation per capita? Well, we are. Right. It would move the insolvency date up 3 years from 2028 to 2025. I really think, though, Rob, the key point, and John talked about this, is that neither of these proposals, no president's budget is ever passed. They're always dead on arrival. This one will be the same, and the Health Care Act is the same way. The Republicans here are very much like the dog that caught the car. They have no idea which way to jump on health care.
The other big issue there, too, is cutting Medicaid, because so many people here in Florida at the end of their life run out of money, and if they're in a nursing home, they rely on Medicaid to pay for that nursing home care, and their kids rely on that to take care of their moms and dads' needs. If the president is suggesting cutting Medicaid, that's going to have a big impact on seniors.
That is the big thing that people don't understand about Medicaid. Medicaid is essentially the default long-term care insurance program for the middle class in this country. You go in the nursing home within a year, if you're a typical person, you have run out of money. If you live any longer, you're going to live on Medicaid.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Can I just jump in on Amtrak? I mean, I heard Amtrak should be thrown out. Coming from New York City, Amtrak has lost money every single year that it's been in existence. It should be turned over to private industry.
So what would you do? Sell Amtrak to a bidder?
Yeah, that's right. Get rid of it. Right, because if you're going to keep costing us money, get rid of it.
All public transportation is subsidized. We subsidize the roads. We subsidize bridges. I mean, that's we subsidize buses. That's part of it.
Yeah, but not
rails
consistently lose money every single year.
But that's but I think that's an argument. But I think the big money, that's a tiny bit of money, is the health care. That's the biggest part. And what Obamacare did in 2008, it reset the social contract in America. Now when you have a discussion, pre-existing conditions are part of the social contract. It's very difficult to find someone who argues that we shouldn't have
Because
them.
you're saying nobody wants to go backwards, where people with
nobody wants to go
pre-existing
backwards.
conditions were discriminated against.
So Obamacare, affordable health care, has moved the discussion on that. It's also moved the discussion on keeping children on parents. But what's interesting is the first bill that was at 17%, the new bill at 34%. One had 24 million people not covered, one had 23 million not covered, the new one. Well, for that 1 million additional people, the cost per each one of those additional 1 million is $210,000. It's pretty pricey to get that competency. So that's not a good plan. You can't get health care under control unless you have cost controls like they do in every other industrialized nation in the world has cost control. When we go in for an MRI, it costs you a certain amount of money. When you buy a Xanax, it costs you a certain amount of money. So we have to look at that if we're going to get health care. Otherwise, we're deluding ourselves.
Bill, what do you think about what Wendy said? And that is that essentially the budget proposal is DOA, that they're not going to take it up. And also, do you think that the Senate is going to go along with the House when it comes to the health care plan?
I don't think the Senate's going to go along with it at all. They'll have to rewrite the entire bill. There's no question about it. Everybody's got a personal interest in the House. They all represent the district of about 800,000 people, and they want to be reelected. So they all have different issues.
And so if they want to be reelected, this is bad for them if they support these two bills? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that it's bad if they support the two bills.
Well, he knows in the House, the Freedom Caucus, which is the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party, is a very dominant group, and they have, in their districts, they're very solid. But in the Senate, and the Republican majority in the House is huge. In the Senate, it's 2. So they have a much slimmer majority, but also there's what's called the Coverage Caucus, which people like Olympia Snowe in Maine and Rob Portman, the former budget director in Ohio.
These are the moderate Republicans.
They're the moderate Republicans, and they have a lot of constituents that are on Medicare, Medicaid in their states, and they don't want to lose them. So it's not going to be able to bring those senators, which echoes these guys. They're never going to be able to get this type of bill passed through the Senate.
But you also hit on 2 states, Ohio and Maine, that are doing extremely well on their own on their health care coverage.
Okay. Well, a former neo-Nazi in Tampa who shot and killed 2 of his roommates last week claimed that the 2 young men who were killed were also neo-Nazis who had disrespected his recent conversion to Islam. A 4th roommate was found to be stockpiling bomb materials, including ammonium nitrate and radioactive elements, according to a federal criminal complaint. That roommate, a member of the Florida National Guard, kept a picture of Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, on his dresser. Both the alleged killer and the alleged bomb maker are now in custody. John, should we be surprised that there's neo-Nazi activity, allegedly, here in the Tampa Bay area?
No, I don't think so. I think you see that everywhere in the United States. I think there's a feeling in a lot of law enforcement circles that we pay too much attention to international terrorism. Not that that's not important, not that we shouldn't fund it, not that we shouldn't try to protect citizens, but that there is a lot of domestic terrorism in this country too, whether it's because of mental health issues or it's anti-government people. But you know, over the last 10 years, we've had the Gabby Gifford shooting, we've had the Virginia Tech shooting, we had the DC sniper, the Wisconsin Sikh. There have been a lot of different domestic terrorism incidents that I think we tend to overlook because the international incidents, the Muslim incidents, get so much coverage.
There's a lot of unanswered questions here too. I mean, we don't know whether or not, whether indeed all 4 of these young men were neo-Nazis or whether just 1 or 2 of them was. How did they get the bomb-making material? Just a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the family of the 2 young men that died say that they weren't really into neo-Nazis, but just the fact that they were living with these other 2 guys raises red flags. The other thing that would concern me is one of the young men, the one who had the Timothy McVeigh picture, is in the National Guard. And some of the others were talking about enlisting in the Navy. I think we need to have some better checks on who exactly is getting into our military.
All right. Well, Governor Scott this week gave few clues about whether or not he'd veto the entire state budget or veto just the education portion of the budget or sign it as it is. The governor voiced concerns about the $82 billion spending package, but did not reveal whether he would do something that hasn't been done in 25 years. That is, veto the entire document. He says, though, he's still concerned about Enterprise Florida and Visit Florida. Both were gutted by the legislature. On the education portion, Scott said legislators fell short of the per-pupil spending level that he wants and complained about the secrecy that was used to arrive at the budget.
So, Wendy, the governor is really in a quandary here because no matter what he does, he's going to anger somebody. What do you think's going through his mind right now?
Well, he's going to be looking at this through the lens of his intention to run for the Senate in a couple of years, and there are advantages and disadvantages to any course, and he's going to be weighing them in that way. Frankly, I believe a veto of the entire budget is really unlikely because it passed by large veto-proof majorities in both houses, and I don't think he'd gain anything from that. A veto of the famous House Bill 7069, which basically is the K-12 education portion of the budget, it's about a third of the total state budget. That's a little more likely. But then that also carries risks and rewards. He would be vetoing some measures that are very popular. This bill includes the Schools of Hope, $150 million, I think it is, to set up charter schools near disadvantaged schools. It also includes Gardner scholarships for mentally disabled children, and the teachers' bonus program, and those things are. Some of those things, the Schools of Hope is universally hated by public education folks, but there are charter schools that are actually assigning their students to write letters in support of 7069, so Scott would anger those people if he vetoes it. But at the same time, the bill doesn't include the increase in public school funding that he wanted. So he's going to be asking himself, what's the best way that he can later refer to his action as courageously taking on those politicians in Tallahassee, by whom he's going to mean the legislators.
But if he does even veto the education portion, he risks having a fight up there in Tallahassee, and if he loses that fight, if the legislators override his veto, then he doesn't look so good.
Well, the education portion got a good veto-proof majority in the House, but in the Senate it passed by 2 votes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Bill, what do you think? It is a dilemma for the governor. He hasn't even gotten the bill yet, so he's got 15 days beyond the point that he gets the bill to make his final decision.
I'm pretty much in agreement with Wendy. I think he's on thin ice. He's skating on thin ice if he goes there. I think he's going to have to let it go. He's going to have to let the budget stand as it is and just sign it.
Yeah, I think he's going to be able to veto 7069 because I think the people that are going to be upset about it, the bill was crafted very shrewdly by House leadership to sort of put him in this position of anger, of anger on one side or another. But I think the teachers, would be happy to give up their bonuses next year just because they know that the bill itself is not a good idea. The people who are really getting hurt, as Wendy talked about, are the children on the Gardner scholarships. These are special need kids. Gardner scholarships will still exist next year if he vetoes this, but there won't be enough to get every single kid in it, and that's a shame, and I would blame the House for that because the House had a chance to approve that money. The Senate wanted to approve it in the general appropriations budget, and the House refused because they wanted to tie it into 7069 to force Scott's hand.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm disappointed in Enterprise Florida, too, because that provides a lot of jobs. That one thing coming in, we did the fact sheets on it, can work up to 7 jobs from the hotel to the restaurant people to this, right across the board. And that doesn't help us here in the state of Florida. I wish they wouldn't have went that way.
But if they go back, do you think there's any change of heart in Tallahassee about Enterprise Florida or Visit Florida?
Well, the Speaker's been pretty clear.
Yeah.
He put displaced homemaker money in that part of the budget. The big thing that was different this year is the implementation bills, which were small. The proviso language is now mammoth. And they put all sorts of bills that failed. I think the big thing with the education bill, what I don't like about the process, is normally if a bill fails in committee, it can't be heard. But the House waived all those rules and stuck everything in what they call the train. This is the biggest train of all time, the biggest choo-choo. I think the governor should veto, because I think that it shows that he's willing to stand up to the other politicians. Remember, it's not whether we think that the legislators were right or wrong. The governor has said, by touring the state and spending his own money from his committee, that these are just other politicians held by special interests. So it would reinforce his message that he's willing to do something.
But is Wendy right, though? I mean, Wendy, you said that this is all about his political future, too, and what's going to make him...
I'm sure that's what he's thinking. And I think, with the exception of the charter school and school choice advocates, the public reaction to Scott, it's been reported, has been almost overwhelmingly in favor of vetoing the education bill.
Although apparently, I talked to some folks today, the new numbers are that the people calling the governor's office for opposed was overwhelmingly opposed. In the last couple of days, it's come even.
Okay.
So the people that are the pro-charter or pro-whatever that you want have kind of got their voice in.
All right. Well, a new report from the Civil Rights Project at UCLA says that schools here in Florida and the rest of the South are slipping back into the segregation of black and Hispanic students, with school choice playing a role.
The report says that after years of making progress on diversity, many southern states have passed laws making public schools less welcoming for students from immigrant families. States across the region are also establishing multiple means for students to leave public schools, either through charter schools or expanding voucher programs for private schools. Now, here in Florida, about 1/3 of all black and Latino students attend public schools that are 90% minority, meaning the number of minority public schools is on the rise. The report notes that Florida also has one of the highest charter school expansion rates in the country. The authors call for greater integration of public schools, including a renewed focus on magnet school programs and increased staff training on diversity issues.
So, Bill, is segregation on the rise, reemerging here in Florida in a big way, and can it be tied to charter schools and school vouchers?
No, I'm going to comment on that on my own, but I'd like to comment just a couple little statements from the Brookings Institute, okay? And they ran theirs from 1999 to 2009, which is a little below that. Charter schools grew 1 to 3 right off the top for all students right across the board. Examples, 11% of Arizona students have charter schools. If we look at D.C., we got 37% in D.C. that have charter schools, and I think they're doing a good job, even though that mayor got knocked out up there. She was doing a better job. And the same UCLA report, they had a Civil Rights Project, found that black charter school students were twice as likely to attend schools that enrolled fewer than 10% non-minority students as their counterparts in traditional schools. Now, my views on this.
Now, we should say that's data going back to 2009.
Yeah, okay. I said that very clearly in the beginning. One of the things that we're having a problem with is the family values. First of all, I'd like to see a mother and father in a family. Part of the problem with these kids is they have no control, and no matter who's in charge, they're not going to do anything about it. I think religion plays an important part, too, in schools. My daughter graduated from a Catholic high school in Queens, in Bayside, Queens. Black students in that school excelled right at the top of the class, and they will take scholarships in there.
So, Bill, and we're running out of time, but you're saying that if we get more kids into private schools, especially private religious schools, we're going to have a better outcome in society.
There's no question about it.
Oh, I think there's a huge question about that. There are no studies that show that vouchers have improved education or that charter schools are failing all around the country. 1 out of every 4 charters that opens in Florida closes. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with charter schools. I'm saying there's a problem with this state in particular. Its zeal to create more and more charter schools as if that's the answer. It is not the answer.
I think, Rob, I think the larger point here is that charter schools and voucher-supported private schools do not have to serve the same mandates that we've put on public schools. They don't have to do desegregation the way public schools have to do. That's one reason that the charter schools are more segregated. They don't have to do a lot of other things like serving kids with disabilities, kids who don't speak English. They don't, for example, have to give a free ride to school to every kid who lives more than 2 miles away. But there are a lot of important policy goals, mandates that we've put on the public schools, including desegregation, that charter schools and voucher-supported private schools don't have to serve.
Bill?
Yeah, real quick. as I said to you in a room before, 50% of the kids that come into Pasco Hernando State College have to take remedial courses, and this is the public education. If your newspaper wants to do something solid, why don't you take a Catholic school, a charter school, and a public school, take their best schools, and let these kids compete and see who does the best coming out of these schools.
Well, and just as he said, though, you have to have the rules have to be the same. The Catholic schools can cherry pick whoever they want. They're getting kids from good families, as you were talking about, with mother and father in the family coming from an affluent neighborhood. If you want to compare apples to apples, which I think a lot of studies have done, it shows that charter schools don't necessarily do any
I
better.
think one of the things, too, is we ought to look at what you've talked about, the segregation. In Hillsborough County, which I work for Senator Roussat, one of his counties, 62% of the kids are economically disadvantaged. Means they get free breakfast, free lunch.
That's huge.
It's huge. It's the highest, maybe the highest in the state of the big counties. So you have a class system developing. But more importantly, you're down to 36% of the kids in Hillsborough school systems is white. And I want to emphasize here, charter schools are part of the public school system. They are counted as public schools. They're paid for by the public schools. The school board does pass through to the charter. So they're counted in these numbers. And that's important. Charter schools are a public school. They're a type of public school.
Barry, when you talk about the number of poverty kids in the school system in Hillsborough County, also speaks to low wages and jobs that are not paying very well.
33% of the kids in Hillsborough are Hispanic, 21% white, and 16% are English language learners, and 1% are homeless. So right, it's a class and poverty. We have a real segregation. What's happening, we talk about the 7,000 kids that are getting the CTC or voucher, so-called, in Hillsborough County, which is black and Hispanic leaving the system, but we should be talking about 9 times that who are white kids that are leaving to go to private schools on their own and having white flight. Why are they leaving?
Wish
Why
we
are
had more
kids
time.
leaving?
This is a really important discussion. We're going to have to do a whole show about this in the future. Thanks, guys, for a great show. And thank you for watching Florida This Week. We welcome your comments. Please write us at ftw@wedu.org and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. It's pledge time here at WEDU again, and we need your help. With your generous donation, we can keep bringing you the programs you love. Please call the number you see on your screen or donate online at our secure website. It's wedu.org, and we very much appreciate your help. Please join us again next Friday night at 8:30 and Sunday afternoon at 12:30. And from all of us here at WEDU, have a good Memorial Day, and we'll see you next week.
Florida This Week is a production of WEDU, who is solely responsible for its content.